Good evening and welcome to episode 30. Episode 30 of the Political Mike podcast. I can't believe it's been 30 episodes, but thank you all for tuning back in. It's been a very eventful week. The impeachment trial is underway. The prosecution has just delivered their closing arguments. The defense will take over tomorrow. In addition to the fact that there still seems to be a little bit of more interesting developments in terms of COVID-19 relief. Democrats seem to be going through a little bit of infighting within the party over the minimum wage increase proposal, and also the who is eligible to receive the next round of COVID-19 relief benefits. Here to help me break it all down are five very distinguished, very accomplished individuals. I'm so great to have this wonderful panel. So grateful. So I'm going to start off by introducing Miss Gianna Darville. Gianna is a recent graduate of Oakland University with a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Public Relations with a minor in Political Science. She has received awards and recognition from numerous industry organizations for her contributions to enhancing diversity and inclusion in the field of public relations, and she has enjoyed the opportunity to raise awareness and drive media around nicotine and tobacco issues from Capitol Hill to the Iowa campaign trail during the 2020 primary process, and as an ambassador for the Truth Initiative. She is currently completing a postgraduate internship. She actually completed a postgraduate internship in public affairs and crisis PR with BCW Global, and she will rejoin Apple's corporate communications team as a public relations specialist. Gianna, thank you so much for being back. The last time she was on was actually episode 1. So I'm so grateful to have her back for episode 30. So much has happened, so much to catch up on, but thank you for being back. Next, I have Chris Johnson, who's filling in for Mike Walker. Mike had to cancel last minute, but Chris, thank you so much for being here. Chris is a proud native of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He's an alum of Oakland University, where he earned a Bachelor's of Arts degree in pre-law with a concentration in political science. He currently serves as the district office chief of staff for Pennsylvania State Representative Joanna McClinton. Previously, he served as a Capitol Hill intern with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation in Washington, D.C., and interned with the 2016 Democratic National Convention Committee in Philadelphia. He's also a former field organizer for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign. Chris, always a treat to have you. Thank you so much for making the time to come back. I'm looking forward to what you have to bring to the table yet again. Next, I have a new guest, Aaliyah Jones. Aaliyah currently serves as a judiciary aide in the office of U.S. Senator Christopher Coons of Delaware. In her current role as a judiciary aide, Aaliyah works on criminal justice and civil rights issues and coordinates the senator's homeland security and justice-related appropriations portfolio. Previously, Aaliyah served as a staff assistant in Senator Coons' D.C. office and has worked as a research intern on the Center for American Progress's Women's Initiative team and as an intern at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. She earned her Bachelor's of Arts degree in political science from Delaware State University. Aaliyah, welcome. I hope this is not the last time you'll be back. I look forward to having you back on more, and I'm excited to see what you're going to bring to the table. So, Jerron Hawkins, very interesting guy. Glad to have him on. He graduated from Howard University as a political science and economics double major. He has been associated with the My Brother's Keeper Alliance since its inception in 2014, which was launched by President Obama as a call to action to close opportunity gaps facing boys and young men of color. Jerron Hawkins was actually honored during the Obama Foundation's first national My Brother's Keeper Rising conference by being granted the opportunity to share his social justice story on President Barack Obama's Instagram account. Jerron is currently a 2L at Howard University School of Law and hopes to pursue a career in public interest law. I'll also add that Jerron actually had a sit down with President Obama late last year with Jonathan Capehart of MSNBC, where they talked about President Obama's new book, Promised Land. So, Jerron, thank you so much for being here. And last but not least is Mr. Jordan Jones. Jordan is a 24-year-old Atlanta native who has committed himself to the fight against systemic inequality. Jordan graduated with his bachelor's degree in political science from Savannah State University, where he then went on to serve in the office of Congressman Buddy Carter through the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. Following his time in D.C., Jordan went on to fight for educational equity as a Teach for America Corps member in Las Vegas Valley, where he also earned his master's degree in education. Jordan has since returned to his hometown of Atlanta, where he currently serves as a senior assistant for Atlanta City Councilman Matt Westmoreland. Amazing panel, very distinguished and accomplished. Resumes are just off the charts. But I wanted to dive in immediately into the impeachment trial. The prosecution has just given their closing arguments. Just last Saturday night, the Wyoming Republican Party voted to overwhelmingly censor U.S. Representative Liz Cheney, who's the third-ranking Republican currently serving in the House of Representatives. And they did this because she voted to impeach former President Donald Trump. Now, what's interesting is that the whole debacle was about newly elected Congresswoman's Marjorie Taylor Greene's outlandish positions as it relates to QAnon conspiracies. Now, she has not received any censorship, but Liz Cheney has. Only 8 of the 74-member state GOP's Central Committee stood to oppose the censure. Only 8. In a vote that didn't proceed to a formal count, the censure document accused Cheney of voting to impeach, even though the U.S. House didn't offer Trump formal hearing or due process. What's interesting is that this whole process was done secretively. So we really don't know who are these 8 members who opposed this, or who are the 74 members who did support it. That comes at the backdrop of this new impeachment trial that's underway. We've heard a very strong case brought by the prosecution. And particularly, they're trying to paint a picture that's as clear as day, that shows that Trump was guilty of incitement. And as a law student, I know that Brandenburg versus Ohio was the case that you want to go to pull out the rule as to what constitutes as incitement. And under that case, it says advocacy that is directed towards inciting or producing imminent lawless action, or is likely to produce such action that's imminent and lawless, is incitement. I want to get your thoughts, panelists, on how do you think the prosecution has done, being that they've ended their arguments, and what have you had any impressions on the defense's side that took place this Tuesday? They're going to start tomorrow.
I wanted to go ahead and get it kicked off just because part of my job now is literally consuming the news all day, every day to inform what we do. And one of the really interesting things about this particular impeachment trial is that there are so many accounts of what happened, and what the what's going on right now is that they're really just trying to paint a picture that's super, super clear, like you were saying, that you can tell that Trump was the one who incited the riot by the testament of the people who attacked the Capitol. If you look at their Facebook posts, if you look at their videos, they're saying that they're acting on behalf of the president, that the president told them to come, that the president invited them to come, etc. And it's pretty damning evidence if you look at it from that really straightforward. It would be different if it was just 1 or 2, but almost every person who was there felt as though they had a personal invitation from the president to come to the Capitol and establish their rights and reinforce that they deserve to have their will heard. And then also, if you look at the actual proceedings, there were about 11 different GOP senators that didn't show up. We're experiencing partisanship in a way that we've never seen it before. And so there are a lot of senators and a lot of representatives and a lot of people who have very influential say in how this goes that have already made up their mind one way or another. And I think that's one of those things that I don't even know what politics is going to look like 5 years from now if we continue down this path. Because even when I was a kid, I didn't remember it being like this, where if you were on this side, you were a bad person. If you were on this side, you were a bad person because you opposed the other bad people. So I feel like this will definitely set a tone for the way the rest of the politics will look and what could possibly be the potential end of the Republican Party as we know it.
Yeah, and the head manager, the floor manager, Jamie Raskin, he laid it out and said, look, we are here to show that Trump was responsible for this. Why? Because he abdicated his duty as the commander in chief to calm this down when he had the opportunity. He had at the time a platform on Twitter. He refused to use it, and hours went by before a video went out. And when it did go out, it was basically a stroke on the back for these rioters. Jamie Raskin has been a professor for constitutional law for a while, from 1990 to 2017 at American University. He's someone who's well versed with First Amendment law in particular. I thought that by orchestrating this whole case by starting by talking about Trump abdicating his role. And remember, a lot of never before seen footage was shown. I haven't seen a lot of these clips, and it brought back the emotional toll. And this is different from the first impeachment in that you don't really get that kind of emotional feel from a transcript with a phone call with the Ukrainian president, Zelensky. But you do when you can see the images yourself and hear the vulgarity and hear, you know, the hostility and watch it from your with your own eyes. Any other thoughts in terms of, you know, the prosecution's case? And I want to throw this question out. If you're the defense, what do you have to work with tomorrow? Anyone can jump in.
Yeah, no, I'll go ahead and jump in. I honestly think that Trump made it incredibly clear from the moment that Joe Biden won the general election that he was not going to accept the election results. And would go to any length necessary to make sure that they were invalidated. Even going as far as to try to call the Georgia Secretary of State and coercion to find some more votes, whatever that means. Those actions combined with his rhetoric, including stand back and stand by, fight like hell, stop the steal. I mean, it should honestly make it impossible for him to deny any responsibility. I mean, he's known from day one the power that his divisive rhetoric holds over his supporters, and he's been using it to his advantage literally since 2016 and probably before. That can't be debated. That said, it's kind of clear to me that there are Senate Republicans who care more about backlash from their base than they are about upholding the honor of the presidential office. And kind of piggybacking off of what Gianna said earlier, I don't really remember a time where we've been this politically divided as a country. There was a time where partisanship was a thing, where you could reach across the aisle and we could share those same common values. But now I just don't see the future of the Republican Party as well. Then, kind of like you said, Mike, after the new video footage they played during the impeachment trial that showed just how severe the danger was at the Capitol, he shouldn't be able to avoid responsibility. I mean, those rioters were there because they believed the rhetoric that Trump was spouting about how the election was being stolen. And instead of calling them off, he used them to try to overthrow our democracy. I mean, one thing that I think was stuck with me over the course of the impeachment trial was how people were referencing the oath of office, how the presidential oath of office says that you should protect, preserve, and defend the Constitution. Trump didn't do any of those things. So at that point, I mean, I don't even understand what the defense has to work with.
And the rioters themselves are saying Trump sent us here. We were invited by Trump. So that it'll be one thing if we were trying to make the connotation solely on the violence and solely on, you know, the disturbing images and, you know, the death and that took place. But you actually have them with their own words saying we have validity to be here. Why? Because we just came from the president's rally and he told us to go to the Capitol and he said he'll march with us. I thought that was really, you know, the thing that really drove it home, you know, and I think they kind of included that in their closing argument. You know, they reminded everyone, yeah, he abdicated his duty. He saw it coming. The language was likely to produce imminent lawless behavior, which it did. You know, it's clear as day. Chris?
No, I was just going to add that I'm glad that you started this question or this topic of the conversation by highlighting the fact that the Republican Party, state parties, voted to censor Liz Cheney for her vote of impeachment. And then you're also seeing that same sort of behavior happening in other state parties, including Arizona, where they, you know, voted to also censure Cindy McCain and I think the governor there for, you know, not being supportive of the president and, you know, being in defense of the democracy that we all hold dearly. And I think part of that shows us, it just tells us exactly where the Republican Party is leaning. And at every level, both at the state level, but also at the congressional level and in the Senate, they're being pulled more towards their base, which is becoming a little bit more riled up and incited by Trump's rhetoric. And this has been spanning back to 2015 when he first got down off the elevator at Trump Tower. And actually, you can even run it back beyond then during the era of Sarah Palin and Newt Gingrich. So we're seeing this sort of polarization happening within that party, which makes it more difficult for everyone, folks who believe in democracy at every level, to be able to defend it, right? Like this should be an open and shut case. Trump, like Jordan was saying, has been brewing this sort of political violence with his rhetoric for the last 4 years. But more intimately, in the last few months since he lost the election, and he clearly lost, right? And it's frustrating to see that, it's almost likely that we won't even get close to 60 votes in the Senate. He'll likely be acquitted, even though the truth is clearly spelled out right in front of our eyes. The truth was spelled out before January 6th even happened, but January 6th was the sad crescendo that led us to people dying, the Capitol itself, the seat of democracy, falling and being brutally damaged. And I know that there are some people on this call who either currently work on Capitol Hill or in Congress or have worked there. And just imagine, having that be your place of work and feeling unsafe, just to walk in there, or, you have these institutions that we always believed in, and now seeing it being destroyed. It's just so frustrating. And so I'm glad that Democrats have really taken the point to spell out the case against Donald Trump. I think that the acquittal is imminent, but his conviction should be obvious. And I'm interested in seeing how this thing plays out going forward.
Can I ask you a question? Do you think that the polarization of the parties is voluntary?
Well,
is that for everyone?
It could be for everyone.
Okay. Well, Chris?
I mean, I would say that like political polarization is something that we have been kind of, America kind of lives through since its birth, right? Like there are people who you can take it back to the American Revolution, folks to say that like that was an era in which Americans at the time were, polarized towards a particular thing. And then, it kind of traveled through the Civil War and beyond, you know what I mean? So America has always had these sort of like these pole positions in terms of, but I think that now that you start to see these coalitions of Black and brown people getting more involved in the political process, I think it pulls people in a further direction. And I think that, questions around the issues of race and how we're going to handle, folks who are non-white males who, have been catered to in this political system, I think also plays a role in, this divisiveness that we're seeing in politics.
I think
I'm sorry. I'd just like to say, Chris, I really appreciate your comments, because I would agree. I think since I've been on the Hill, I've probably been in the most polarized Congress that, this country has seen. However, I don't know if I would say that I think that it's moving in a direction where like we won't know this Republican Party, or, it's just moving in a direction that's even more divisive per se. I mean, if you think about it, last January 2020, that impeachment vote was the first time in the conviction in U.S. history where you had a bipartisan vote on impeachment. I mean, that's incredible. It's really crazy to think about. And even in this case, you had a senator like Senator Cassidy, who was swayed to vote to say, yeah, the constitutionality of like this impeachment proceeding is there. So I think that I agree with you. The partisanship, the polarization has been building, and possibly it started with Newt Gingrich, and you saw this creation of like red and blue states for the first time being talked about in our electoral map. But I do not agree per se that, we're seeing like the most partisan, or, like it's just moving in a direction where, it's unheard of, and we won't know what it looks like. I mean, just imagine a senator was caned on the floor during the Civil War. We're not seeing that, not in the Senate. I mean, so, and my boss just introduced the Eugene Goodman Congressional Gold Medal bill. We got wide bipartisan support on that. I don't think that you would have seen that same thing possibly during the Civil War. So
I think there are a lot of things that we wouldn't have seen during the Civil War.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, I think it's easy in our most recent, politics. Yes, like we are seeing unheard of cases, but I think I agree with you, Chris. Trump is a product of what was building. Like this whole thing of Trumpism existed well before Trump. I mean, the House Freedom Caucus was on the fringes. We put that in the mainstream when you had a vice presidential pick like Sarah Palin. So I just, and also, you know, I think the House managers are doing an incredible job. You know, I thought the House managers from the 2020 impeachment trial did a great job, but they learned so much more. I think that the argument's much more compelling. You know, it's easier when you have those physical, like those visual elements. But impeachment is a political process. So they can make the best legal arguments they want, but you're right, at the end of the day, they're voting for their bases. And unfortunately, there are way too many people who do believe this election was rigged. And I think that the real issue is not just that, you know, Trump did this, he incited it, but how do you actually change the minds of the American people?
And you know, thank you. These are excellent points, Aaliyah. And the thing is, in addition to, you know, Jaron's question pertaining to polarization, I think about a quote from Biden's speech. I believe he made the night he won, or the night it was announced that he would be the president-elect. And he said, polarization is basically a conscious decision. You're making a decision not to meet each other in the middle. And when I think about that quote, I think about the reports of Josh Hawley up in the balcony, looking like he's doodling or writing something instead of paying attention to the Senate the trial that's unfolding. I think about Rubio and Cruz, who walked out during Representative Ted Lewin's presentation today. This is evidence of a conscious decision, I believe, to ensure that you're not going to be an impartial juror, because that's what these senators are supposedly supposed to be in this trial. They're not supposed to have made up their mind already, but unfortunately, you have the majority of people already made up their mind about this trial. Now, the surprise, I think, was Bill Cassidy and some others who said, look, we're going to, because the Republicans were really banking on a procedural argument to begin with. And then when the prosecution just blew that out of the water, because remember the defense, and this is not even partisan, like anyone, while this was going on, I was saying, you know, if this was a law school mock trial, which side would you honestly want to be on right now? Because the defense didn't really have consistency in their argument. They talked about free speech in one breath. Then they said, well, this is just partisanship. This is just the Democrats not wanting to run against Trump in 2024. There was no consistency. There was no story. There was no narration. And I think the building blocks that is necessary for, you know, effective prosecution, I don't think was there. Gianna, I think you're going to jump in.
Oh, I have lots of thoughts all the time. So I think in part, it's a resurgence of political theater as we knew it before Trump, because during the Trump era, it wasn't political theater as much as it was a distinct and distinguishable allegiance to the base, whether that was the Democratic base or the Republican base, to the media. That was really the only thing that mattered. Media perception was the most important thing, as well as the social face that Trump was putting on Twitter and the messages that were put out that way. And so in a lot of the things that we're seeing, even just with the impeachment trials as they're going on now, it's like you were saying, these small little things trying to signal to the American public through the media that the mind has already been made up, or that they've already decided they're going to be loyal to the base, et cetera. And so this idea of the polarization and the partisanship, it doesn't necessarily apply to all bills. Like for a lot of the different nicotine bills that have been put on the table and a lot of things to help with the youth vaping crisis, we've been able to achieve bipartisan support, on all of these different issues. But once it comes to a principal issue of the party, so whether that's raising the minimum wage or talking about immigration or things that people run on to get reelection and to get dollars from the Republican Party or dollars from the Democratic Party, that's where we're seeing the most polarization, in my opinion. So it's I feel like it's an oversimplification to believe that since we're able to get bipartisan support on certain things, that there still isn't a deeply rooted issue of saving public face for reelection for the simple purpose of retaining the support of that base and retaining that position. Like, I think that's kind of more so the core issue, what we're looking at now, where it's like, yeah, there are a lot of smaller quote unquote lesser, bills that are being passed and things that are being put on the floor and things that are going on, but they're always overshadowed by all of these larger things we're seeing. And that's what a lot of the American people are focusing on. And so the partisanship is continuing to spread and trickle down into households all around the country.
So Joe Neguse, who a congressman from Colorado, who presented right after Jamie Raskin when they opened, and they kind of followed that format all throughout the week. Said, the defense is trying to present Trump as merely like a guy who was at a rally expressing a political opinion that we disagree with, and now we're trying to put him in jail for it. He said that has nothing to do with the reality of these charges or of the constitutional offense. Raskin, and I think all of the House managers really went back to textualist argument. Let's look at the text itself of the Constitution. Let's look at the text of Brandenburg versus Ohio as to what constitutes incitement, and then let's apply the law to the facts. And conservatives pride themselves in appointing judges and federal judges who abide by the text of the Constitution, not the intent of the framers, not the intent of the legislators, strictly what's in the four corners of the text. And so for them to use that argument against them, I thought was brilliant, because you really don't have much room to maneuver outside of the text because, like we had talked about earlier, the footage, you have people with their own words saying, we're here causing mayhem and destruction and violence because we were riled up and sent here by Trump. So even if the argument is, well, he didn't think that his words or his speech would be taken in that way. We didn't think this would be going that far. They did, they took it that way. And this is the result. Just last week, we had the funeral of Brian Sicknick, who was the police officer who was, they took a pole with the American flag still on it and beat him until he died. So the consequences are tangible and real. And I think that's what makes this impeachment process a whole different beast from the first one in December of 2019. You can always say, well, the text of the transcript meant this, or, we don't know what his body language was, or we didn't know what kind of outside factors need to be considered. Here, it's as clear as day. I think someone else is going to jump in. Well, if not.
No, I think I agree, and I think that the managers did a really good job of showing, he's not just a private citizen. Like, he's not just someone on the side of the street yelling, saying, like, this election is rigged, that you kind of roll your eyes at. He had the power of the presidency, and that power comes with a lot of influence. And I think that they did a really good job of showing that. I think, at this point, like we all said, it's very unlikely that, he gets convicted. However, I think that the managers are doing a good job because at this point, they're really doing a conviction of the American people. And so you're looking for the public. And I think that, more importantly than their legal arguments, they're reaching people. And I don't think that in the first impeachment trial that the normal citizen was following it the same way. And of course, you have a much more appealing and compelling argument here, but I think that they're doing a really good job of that. However, I don't know if any of you do this, but especially with big cases like this, I like to go to Fox News and see, what the conservative outlets are saying. And the other night, I think it was the end of the first night of the impeachment trial, just literally right after the trial ended, there was no mention of the impeachment. And I think that that is the biggest problem. How are we going to fix this issue when the news and, if one person of another party, a conservative, goes and Googles the same exact information that I do, we get wildly different results. And I think that if we're going to talk about bringing a conscience back to Congress and addressing these issues of, deeply rooted partisanship, I think that they're showing themselves in the halls of Congress. But it's starting at the ballot boxes, and that's from the misinformation that they're getting.
No, that's a really solid point. And I think the amount of information that's out there for people to have access to, whether it's true or not, fuels the polarization that we're experiencing. And remember, this is supposed to be an impartial trial. Senator Patrick Leahy, although he's a Democrat, is the presiding officer over this process because Trump is not the sitting president, and so the Supreme Court Justice, the Chief Justice, Justice Roberts, was not going to sit in. Patrick Leahy took that position, and he's now in a position where he's separating himself from the political party and solely acting as an officer of this trial. What was also interesting was the analogy I think that Raskin pulled from Oliver Wendell Holmes' frequently used phrase, it's like crying fire in a crowded theater. He said it's more, this case is more like a case where the town fire chief who's paid to put out fires sends a mob, not to yell fire in a crowded theater, but to actually set the theater on fire. He said, and who then, when the fire alarms go off, the calls start flooding into his department, asking for help, and he does nothing but sit back and encourage the mob to continue its rampage and watch the fire spread on TV with glee and delight. I thought that was a really effective analogy because, in prosecution, it's all about visuals, and that was a very visual narration, I think, or analogy of what actually took place. Trump was taken to the White House after the rally got out of control. Pence was in the Capitol building, and his Secret Service had to come and whisk him away. And then what was also stark was that you see images of people just minutes away from when the rioters were just about to, find them. I thought all of that was very striking. But, who knows what the defense is going to bring tomorrow. I seriously doubt that it'll be anything that could mount a serious challenge to what was laid out. Just because I think the facts are just as clear as possible. But before we transition from this topic, what do you think about the Republican criticism that says, well, being that they're the ones, the House managers, that file these articles of impeachment, the burden of proof was on them anyway, so they had to, do a good job.
I think I just, once again, I sum it up. Impeachment is a political process. Of course, they're going to say something like that.
And to follow up, I completely agree. Like, the reason I asked the question earlier, because I think that this current spike in polarization of parties is definitely fueled by fear. Like, Trump was a notorious president for reprimanding people, for the slightest of tasks. So, if I was a senator or a member of Congress that's a part of the GOP, why would I think I'm any different? Especially how we saw how Mitt Romney was reprimanded after the first impeachment. And then again, we got Liz Cheney, the third ranking Republican, and she's getting reprimanded. So everybody is just like following suit right now. And I guess he's still controlling the party from outside the White House.
And what was also really effective, I think, was the use of Republican officials on camera, denouncing Trump for what he's done. Charlie Baker, the governor of Massachusetts, Larry Hogan, the governor of Maryland, all giving, all expressing their condemnation of what took place.
Those are like the expectant stuff. Like, Larry Hogan, for example, has, notorious been like a semi-progressive Republican. So it's not far-fetched that, he's speaking out against something like this. So I think that there's a list of, even before Mitt Romney voted against Trump, we kind of knew he was leaning that way because he had already expressed so in, several media outlets. So I think that Liz Cheney was probably, one person that they didn't see, especially with their political roots. Her dad having served as a past VP, and it's like, why are you speaking out against a former GOP president? So I think that that's kind of the situation we're looking at. And it's I truly believe that there are more members of the GOP party that want to speak out against Trump. But, Trump has literally shut down elections and have ruined people who have turned against him.
So, but what do you make of the fact that this impeachment is unique? And I think, Aaliyah, you brought it out earlier in terms of the bipartisanship nature. Because even though you may have Republicans of different factions in the party, they're still Republicans. They still wear the name. They're not going to say I'm independent or I'm a Democrat. They're staying solidly in the party, but they are at odds with each other. Like Mitt Romney challenging Josh Hawley and Marco Rubio looking at them the night it happened and said, you know how we stop the madness? We stop lying to the American people. Moments like these seem to be more frequent with this impeachment process. Bill Cassidy saying, look, I'm an impartial juror. I listened to both sides, and I went with the side that made the most sense and that was organized and gave a strong case. I mean, we're not seeing a united front like we usually did during the Trump years during this impeachment trial. And I think the big question is, where does Mitch McConnell vote? Because I think if he votes to convict, you're looking at a whole different ballgame, Aaliyah.
I don't think you will see Mitt Romney vote to convict. I don't think that there's a universe where that happens.
I misspoke. I didn't mean Mitt Romney. I meant Mitch McConnell.
Mitch McConnell. I mean, I'm sorry. I do think. I mean, Mitt Romney did last time. Yeah, Mitch McConnell. He's not voting to convict. I will say, as much as I say yes, like they've been bipartisan. Look at where these senators are from. Like they are the Larry Hogans of the Senate, right? Murkowski was one of the people who voted to uphold the Affordable Care Act. Like they would not be elected if they weren't like this. And that's why I was so shocked by Cassidy, because being in Louisiana, that was pretty amazing. But Cassidy also just was reelected. So And I think, to Mitch McConnell, and when he came out and, said, what happened was wrong. We need to heal from this. McConnell lost Georgia. Like, the Republican Party is upset at what has happened under Trump. They want power. Like, understandably, both parties do. Because with power, you're able to move legislation. I mean, we're seeing this reconciliation package come into form. Reconciliation itself is impossible if you don't have both chambers and the presidency. So I'm not surprised that Mitch McConnell is saying this. He wants the Republican Party to be back to what it was under the establishment. He does not like these fringe groups involved because it relinquishes his own power. He's been at the whim of Trump for the past 4 years. And he wants that power back. So
I really like that point you made in terms of in 2 years Mitch McConnell is calculating already. Mitch McConnell is the most calculating politician on Capitol Hill. I don't think anyone else who takes otherwise would have much to work with, because when you look at what he's done in terms of getting 3 Supreme Court justices rammed through in a short amount of time, 1 presidential term. And that's just judges. I mean, we're talking about, look at the last impeachment trial. Look at everything. I mean, he knows he's thinking 10 steps ahead. But I want to pivot a little bit, because the Washington Post reported that days before former President Donald Trump's second impeachment trial began this week, more than 100 former GOP officials reportedly hopped on a Zoom call, and the topic of discussion was how to best rally whatever anti-Trump momentum is left in the party. The talk that took place this past Friday, which Reuters reported, included former elected Republican officials from the past 4 GOP administrations, touched on whether to launch a new center-right party. The former, the former chief policy director, Evan McMullin, who, mind you, he ran as an independent in 2016 in Utah. He was there and gave her an account of what happened. The talks were another sign of the deep divisions within that party. And this comes at the backdrop of Senators 4 now with Richard Shelby announcing they're not running for re-election in 2022. Richard Shelby's just the latest. I thought this was really interesting. You have Richard Shelby. You have the senator from Pennsylvania, Pat Toomey. You have Richard Burr of North Carolina and Rob Portman of Ohio, all announcing that they're not looking for another term. What do you make of this? Are we seeing the establishment or the center-right wing of the party submitting to the Trump wing of the party? Are we seeing more of an aggressive position from the center-right side of the party to say, no, we want our party back? Remember the Lincoln Project?
Yeah, I definitely think that we're going to see a sort of rebrand of the Republican Party, if you will. Kind of what you're saying as far as establishing this center-right coalition, where it isn't quite as far right as a lot of the ideas that were perpetuated under the Trump administration that are now associated with Trumpism. Because I feel like there were a lot of people who were Republicans or who were conservative leaning that didn't fully agree with everything that Trump was doing and have disassociated themselves from that kind of Republican Party. And so a lot of these seats that we're now seeing coming and becoming open, I do think we're going to see the GOP trying to embrace a new set of voters, because overwhelmingly, we're seeing people who are our age and younger become really active on these issues, become very passionate about these issues because it's directly affecting us. The coronavirus pandemic threw off graduations, it threw off, job plans, it threw off all these different things. It upset the economy in such a way that a lot of people are more so interested now in, rather than the separation of, government from private life, et cetera. They're looking for help. Very quite simply, they're looking for help. And I do think that the GOP will try to retain their core values while also bringing people into their base, because that's all they really can do at this point.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but some of these states are swing states. And I don't think that it's the Republican Party necessarily trying to preserve, the power or infrastructure that they currently maintain. I think it's more so that these senators are just throwing in the towel, like, hey, y'all are crazy. Like, this ain't about politics no more. People's lives have literally been lost, like literally, as we saw at the Capitol. Like, and I think that this is about, like, had it not been, what is his name? It pains me that his name escapes me right now. But right. The officer who was promoted to Sergeant at Arms for the Senate, and how he literally protected them. Had he not been there, that might have been Senator Pat Toomey's life. You never know. So I think that some of these people are just like, hey, I'm old. Y'all are crazy. I'm about to go home and chill out with my millions.
And you made a good point, because I think Mitt Romney, once he saw the footage of that officer you had mentioned, telling him in the nick of time to go the other way in the hallway, he didn't realize how close he was to actually confronting these rioters. And I think that was the reaction of a lot of senators. I was reading Politico just to look at what kind of reaction some of these senators had. And from what I read, senators were gripped by the footage showing violent rioters seemingly taking cues from Trump's rhetoric and storming into the Capitol. Senator Cory Booker put his hands over his eyes when footage played of a shooting outside the main House door. Several senators rubbed their eyes and shook their heads during a video showing a D.C. Police officer being crushed between a set of doors. Senator Joe Manchin shook his head when Trump told the rioters, "We love you." All of these visuals really paint a picture of the moderate wing, at least, Joe Manchin, Mitt Romney, Murkowski, Susan Collins. Those are really the people I'm seeing personally voting to convict. I think that, for them not to vote against conviction right now would be more of a backlash on them because of their brand of politics. They've branded themselves to be people in the middle who can reason with the Democrats. The thing is, what are they going to say in terms of, how's Mitt Romney going to go back to Utah? Forget Mitt Romney. He's not doing it. But Lisa Murkowski, how is she going to go back to Alaska? How Susan Collins going to go back to Maine and explain that to their constituents? Folks who may have been Democrat or moderate and said, look, I'm voting for Republican this time.
First, just Manchin is in the Democratic Party. I know it's tough to remember sometimes.
No. But he's also said, I'm not voting for I'm not voting to get rid of the filibuster.
Yeah.
Right? So,
and I don't think he's going to change. And I think I'm not sure if Sinema came out and said that, but I wouldn't be surprised if she also didn't want to get rid of the filibuster. But I think that, when we talk about divisions in the party, I think that it's important to realize that the Democratic Party also still has divisions. I think both parties are just having real issues with figuring out in what direction they want to be and want to go in. The House Democratic, there's just a new House Democratic caucus. It's, I think, the New Democrat Coalition. It's made of moderate Democrats who want to find ways, even though they're in the majority, to work across the aisle. because even though we got rid of Trump, the margin of Democrats leading in the House shortened in the last election. And I think it's important to remember that, like, Democrats lost a lot of power in the House. And I mean, even though we celebrate that, you know, now we can get things done in the Senate, it's split 50-50. Both parties are very confused in which direction they want to go. And I think you have factions within each party that, much less so in the Senate, because of how difficult it is to even get in the Senate. Typically, you see more established candidates, but both parties are very confused. I mean, you have one wing with AOC and Rashida Tlaib, who are very progressive. And I think the biggest difference is that the progressive wing of the Democratic Party isn't, like, in leadership in the same way. It's not Pelosi, you know, and it's not these people who are just bending to the whims of, you know, the more progressive factions within the Democratic Party. Whereas in the Republican Party, you had a president that represented that faction. So I think just in Congress in general, there's a lot of confusion on both sides. And it's just evident with Republicans because they're healing from Trump.
No, yeah, I agree with Aaliyah's point. Kind of piggybacking off of that as well. I think that it would be dangerous for Democrats to kind of like bask in this moment of victory. I think that we were as a party able to unite around the fact that we wanted to get Trump out of office. But now that we got that win, now it's time to see, all right, what direction are we going to move in? What is going to be our priorities moving forward? Obviously, I mean, Republicans need to win back, I think, like 20 seats to get the majority, and Democrats only need to win 14. So, like, at its face value, it may look like the road to retain our majority, for Democrats to retain the majority, is a little bit easier than Republicans. But I think it can't be understated that President Trump, or former President Trump, got 70 million views. 70 million votes, and people are still supporting him. And just like a lot of the Democrats were able to basically motivate their base to get to the poll just off the strength of getting Trump out, I feel like the GOP can motivate their base just the same by making sure that they can get that one more seats to get some power back. So definitely, I feel like it looks like the Republicans have less of a chance right now, but Democrats can't afford to stall out right now because we can lose the momentum that we gained quickly.
Yeah, and excellent points. I wanted to just clarify with Joe Manchin, even though he's a Democrat, remember he has his record in voting is, you know, he's voted in favor with Republican, you know, positions more than any other Democratic senator right now in this Congress. So for him to, you know, I think be on the side of conviction, of course, you know, he's a Democrat, we expect that. But remember, this is the same guy who voted for Neil Gorsuch to be on the Supreme Court. And, you know, I've heard folks say, if you're not going to vote against Supreme Court justices, what are you there for? You know, legislation we're playing with for the next election. But when you're talking about judges, we're talking about the next generation. But, you know, what's key is that these people who are announcing their retirement, I mean, these are huge key players. I mean, Rob Portman was serving in the George W. Bush White House. Richard Shelby, he was the chair of 4 committees: appropriations, banking, intelligence, you know, just to name a few. And for him to say, I'm jumping ship, you know, I know he's 86, but, you know, for him to say, look, this is the time I'm going to leave. I think it's a key piece of news right there. But being that we're talking about some divisions on the Democratic side, I want to go ahead and pivot a little bit because we are seeing some divisions as it pertains to the minimum wage. Senator Bernie Sanders 5 days ago tweeted a really interesting message. He was actually advocating and saying that unbelievable. You know, these were his words. Unbelievable. There are 7 Dems who want to lower the income eligibility for direct payments from $75,000 to $50,000 for individuals and $150,000 to $100,000 for couples. In other words, working class people who got checks from Trump would not get them from Biden. Brilliant. These were his words. You know, Senator Bernie Sanders' hike to, you know, raise the federal minimum wage is another source of contention to $15 an hour, because this is going to increase the deficit, according to the Congressional Budget Office, by $54 billion over a decade. And President Biden's push for more direct payments is sparking a new debate within the party. I want to get your thoughts on, you know, who's on the right side of the issue in this, and you know, depending on your answer, how does that side convince the party as a whole to move forward with this voice?
I think Bernie has it right, honestly. I mean, increasing the minimum wage to 15, or just increasing a period, is long overdue. I think the pandemic has only exacerbated that need. We obviously have 10 million Americans jobless. I think over 40 million living below the federal poverty line. The time has been supposed to happen, and now, especially now, coming at the end of the pandemic, it's timely. And without federal assistance, even the people that can work, they're going to continue to be trapped in that cycle of poverty. I mean, we have unemployment benefits running out in the middle of March. If we don't act now, then we're going to see a lot of people on the streets, even more so than there are now. However, even though I agree with Bernie, I think it's the right thing to do. It seems unlikely that minimum wage, that measure gets added into the reconciliation process unless you can get his lawyers to prove that that would actually have some budget implications. I don't think it's that hard to prove, to be honest. Kind of piggybacking off of that too. I was doing a little research prior to this, and I found out that the value of the minimum wage at a peak in 1968, and if it would have kept pace with inflation up to this point, it would be about $12 an hour right now. So I mean, it's not really too far off from what it should be. And when we think about being able to pull people above the federal poverty line, if we can do that, then we can really put a dent in wage inequality. And it seems like being able to increase the minimum wage federally is one of the primary ways that we'll be able to address wage inequality. And for so many progressive Democrats kind of making that their moniker over the past few years, I think this is the time to act on that.
Just following up off that, I think that the minimum wage honestly needs to be past $15. $15, 40 hours a week, full time, and that's around $32,000 odd. Fact check me, but the poverty line's around 14, 15. Those 32 after taxes about to be like 17. No, it's not enough. Like, who's living, once you pay rent, groceries, car insurance, if you got a car, gas, etc., is not enough to live off of. So I think that the question should be absolutely, honestly, the argument should be better whether or not we're behind, actually, not whether or not we should raise it. And then, speaking to I'm not calling him your favorite senator, but you brought him up a few times. If I'm not mistaken, I did some research too, and Senator Manchin's actually opposed to raising it to $15. But it's terrible. It's terrible that the way we treat our citizens. It's terrible that veterans come home and can't even find housing. Let's talk about housing justice. We're behind. $15 is behind.
Really quick too, Jerron. Senator Manchin, he did oppose it, but he mentioned just doing the $11 an hour like they're already doing in West Virginia, which still, to your point, isn't enough. I found out that the living wage for a household with 2 adults and two kids is actually about $16.54. So even the $15 isn't enough for a livable wage. But yeah,
And I think the other thing to remember is this whole idea that it's not $15 minimum wage tomorrow. It's $15 minimum wage by 2025, when we're still going to be behind the curve of first world countries of the minimum wage. Like, it makes no sense because we also offer less benefits than a lot of first world countries where we have the ability to tax the upper 1%. We have the ability to do so many different things that would help to balance the deficit, but we choose not to because of the way that we choose to stimulate our economy. And so I was reading a newsletter that Times sent out, I think it was like their Sunday edition, and they were analyzing over the last couple of presidencies whether the economy, and it was a very vague estimation, if you will, but whether the economy did better under Republican presidents or under Democratic presidents, how the administrations looked. And in many ways, the administrations looked better under Democratic presidents who are passing these more progressive things. Now, keep in mind, obviously, ripple effects of presidencies, right? So what you do during one presidency is going to affect the next one. But this idea that progressive policies can and very well could change the course of our economy as a whole, because we've seen it happen in other countries, and we've seen it happen when there is this driving idea and this driving goal. I think there's potential for it, but with the rise of partisanship, and also with this idea that Biden is not going to live forever, he is not going to be our president forever. The country will probably be ready for a Republican president after this happens. So whatever he does could very well be reversed very soon after. And whatever he chooses to do will live on in infamy if he's followed by a Republican president who's able to then turn the economy around on the ripple effects of his policies. So
go ahead.
Well, first, yeah, I definitely agree we should raise the minimum wage. I also think that, they should be thinking about the minimum wage depending on where you live. $15 in, a small town in Arkansas is very different than $15 in DC. And I think another thing that COVID has shown us is that the essential workers, the people we're really relying on right now, people who have not been able to stay home and work from home at any point in time, are the people we are underpaying. And that is absolutely ridiculous. This country relies on many blue collar workers, and it's just unacceptable that we're not paying people a living wage. So completely agree. It's well past time that we need to do something about it. I agree. $15 is not enough, especially in cities where you literally can't live on that. You can work 2 jobs and still not live on that. So just adding that.
So I think to Gianna's point, what you were saying that the presidency are ripple effects. If I was a Democrat, I honestly would be scared because I don't want to create another Trump. Because I think that, something that people stray away from is that the truth of the matter is that Obama created Trump. And I believe that President Obama's, his progressive policies, his existence, the history he's made created, I think that Newton's law of physics applies to people as well, like God and the devil type, concept. So I think that if I was a Democrat, I wouldn't want Biden to jump out there too much because we don't want a repeat of a repealing of the Affordable Care Act and all these other progressive policies that Obama put in place. So it's like, how do I still help the people, but, also keep the enemies at bay? Because I think at a certain point, President Obama was very non-conforming to, a lot of the GOP members.
So I honestly think that bigotry and messaging created Trump. One of the big things that they ran on was immigration. And if you look at Obama's immigration policies, in his first term, he actually deported more people than Bush did, like his entire presidency.
And drone strikes. I know he doesn't have the cleanest record.
Yeah, and even when he, got us out of the recession, he did that by bailing out big banks. Those aren't super progressive policies. I think that's what gave way to a Bernie. So I really think that it's messaging, and it goes back to what I was saying about, how we're messaging to how Fox News is messaging, how we're getting different opinions. Because I actually don't think if you look at the beginning of Obama's presidency that he was so progressive. Republicans from the jump when he got in office said that they were not going to work with him. They were going to block what he was doing. And he even spent the first 2 years when the Democrats had Congress not pushing for the most progressive things. I mean, his big thing was healthcare reform, but outside of that, he wasn't working through and getting DC statehood or many of the other things that we're saying we need. So I don't know if I agree with that. I think that honestly, they just messaged him as a socialist, as this crazy person, and they put things like the Affordable Care Act, which helps so many people, and labeled it Obamacare and turned it into something it's just not.
Do you think that messaging was exacerbated by the fact that we did have a black man in office, and these, people, these 70 million odd people that voted for Trump simply were not happy with that, so they were willing to go to arm's length to, rectify this problem? And then the fact that in 2012 the problem wasn't rectified, but continued. That was kind of the point I was making. I know that some of his policies, and I get in this debate a lot because President Obama is my mentor, and people like to drag on me about that. But I do know about the drone strikes. I do know he deported far more people than we make mention of. And then also I was watching an interview with the Breakfast Club with Charlemagne, and President Obama simply has this a rising tide floats all boats rhetoric. But, more so in the sense that I was targeting policies that were very progressive and proactive for people of color. It just so happened that everybody benefited. And then I do understand it from a legal perspective because, you can't, it can't be I can't remember that right now. But basically it would trigger what was that, strict liability, targeting a certain suspect class and whatnot. So,
Strict scrutiny.
Strict scrutiny. I'm sorry. I'm tired. But no, I definitely I hear your point. I hear your point for sure.
I mean, yeah, I'm not sitting here and saying Obama didn't do a bunch of things, definitely not railing against you, but I just think that it was much more about messaging than what he actually was doing. I completely agree with you on the issue of race and how that contributed to his ability and the messaging around him. You know, I think Brian Stevenson just says it so well when he says that we may have won the Civil War, but we lost the narrative war. And we're in, you know, you said that, you know, 2012 and 2008, like we had this messaging, it didn't get rectified 2012. It happened well before that. We haven't been telling the truth about how people are disenfranchised in this country since this country first came into existence. And I don't think you will see any of us, and I think a big reason why we have this partisanship is because we can't honestly have a conversation about what's happening in this country. And I think that's why I just keep railing against this point of we need to start telling the truth, and not just in politics, but in our messaging on political platforms. And, you know, I think a lot of people are talking about the censorship of Twitter and Facebook and other big tech companies, but that's long overdue. That's what gave way to something like Trump. The fact that misinformation, it just runs rampant.
Can I just weigh in a little bit? I've heard, folks criticize, and I remember the 2012 election and how it happened and the autopsy that the Republicans underwent. Because remember that whole idea was, and I said in the last broadcast last week, how do we reach out to Latino voters? How do we reach out to African-American voters? How do we expand our base so that in 2016 we have a stronger chance, right? Because remember that election was pretty decisive. It was declared, I think, around 10:30 or 11 that Obama was going to be reelected. It wasn't an all-nighter. It wasn't like 2000. It wasn't like 2016. It was a very clear-cut election. And even though, the deportation rates were high under the Obama administration, you did have the DACA program, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. You did have an aggressive or intentional, I should say, move by the administration to try to create a pathway to citizenship for these people. There was not this open hostility. So I think in that respect, I think looking at American history, there's a lot of ebbs and flows. The Civil War was followed by the Reconstruction era. The Reconstruction era was followed by the Jim Crow era. The Civil Rights Movement was followed by the Nixon's Law and Order campaign. The move to rectify all of the civil rights policies that took place, the ending of affirmative action, all these different things. I think, in that respect, it's easy to see Trump as the total and complete reaction of Obama in that respect. But just to bring it home a little bit, under the fast track budget process that Democrats could use to clear the aid package with just 51 votes, the bill has to have a direct and substantial impact on federal spending, revenue, or the debt. So going back to Bernie Sanders in terms of the division of the Democratic Party, of course, this works to his benefit because the CBO, as I mentioned earlier, did estimate that this will have a direct impact, a substantial impact on federal spending. So the Congressional Budget Office score is a boon for the Democrats fighting for the minimum wage hike to be included in the new COVID relief package. In your view, do you think this way of getting that process, the fast track budget process, is that going to be effective, or is that setting the tone for more friction and partisanship moving forward? Now, keep in mind, the Biden administration did learn from the first 6 months of the Obama administration, because remember, they waited for the GOP to jump on board and say, okay, we want this to be a bipartisan process. We're in the economic crisis, the worst one since the Great Depression. We're going to wait. And what did they do? They waited 6 months, and it looked like they got egg on their face a little bit afterwards, So the Biden administration, I think, is learning from that. What say you, panelists?
I think it was expected. I think that's why, the races of Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff was so important, so we can have control. Because, what happens when everything is blue? We just flow like water, literally. So, and I think was one of the problems with Obama's administration, that he became a lame duck president at one point. So I think that once Republicans knew that we had secured those 2 senatorial victories in Georgia, it was, clear pastures for us, and we was going to go in there and do what Trump did, but, in a more progressive and helpful and, not in a sense of bigotry or racism, but, love and peace.
No, I'm speaking of this fast tracking it with this whole reconciliation process. I mean, I just want to drive home the point that these unemployment benefits run out in the middle of March, like not even 4 weeks away. And I don't want to see the effects of that. If we have even more people on the streets, we have even more people who are getting evicted. You have moratoriums in this soon. I think that the reconciliation process is the best way to try to get this done for sure. Now, I don't think it's going to happen still, but I do think they're going about it the right way. Just kind of speaking to your point, but the division that we have within the Democratic Party with people not agreeing, you got Senator Manchin not agreeing. You have Joe Biden already saying that he's not sure if it's going to be able to survive reconciliation. It seems like Bernie might be more or less alone in this, but being that he is the new chair of the Senate Budget Committee, I think this is probably the most power he's been able to, well, the biggest chance he's had to be able to do this since he's been in elected office.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that all of the things that Bernie is saying that he wants in the reconciliation package will make it. I don't think that the reconciliation will further divide Congress or per se. Reconciliation was created for moments like this when you can't move things. And just to be clear, Republicans took full advantage of this process when they were able to. There have been many reconciliation packages in the past, and Democrats have spent the past 4 or 6 years now, being unable to move important things, life-changing measures. And I think that this is why the American people voted them in, so that, you could get that relief during a pandemic, and, people could have relief from things like their student loans. So, no, they're doing what the American people want them to do right now.
To defend Bernie a little bit, though, he has literally spent how many terms? Six terms, 7 terms, something like that.
Seems like his whole career around this issue.
His entire career. If there's anyone I know that knows how to work the system and negotiate with the other side, I would kind of defer to Bernie on that. And with that being said, it's like if we're engaging in business, I want 50,000. I'm gonna start at 100 and work you down to make you think like you got a deal when actually this is what I wanted the whole time. And if you did accept the 100K, straight out the gate, then you're just stupid. And I think that's kind of what Bernie's aiming for. Like, I'm gonna start all the way up here, but I really want here, and I'm just gonna work them down and make them feel like they got a deal. And he has age and seniority in the Senate like none other. So I definitely think that he's a master negotiator at this point.
But I would question you, Mitch McConnell. Oh, go ahead, Leah. Sorry.
I don't know if I would say he's great at negotiating with the other side, but I will say Bernie is great at pitching his ideas to the American people. And, he's great with having you rail against your senator to say, this is what I need. If you look, ever since Bernie ran in 2016, he's completely changed the Democratic platform. He's forced them further left. And I don't think you would see discussions about really tackling student loan debt and all of, raising the minimum wage and things that people really railing against if you didn't have someone like Bernie coming out and making that pitch to the American people. So I will agree with that in that way, he is very much, and that's a talent to be able to speak to the American people that way. So I definitely give him credit there.
So honestly, too, Mike, it would behoove most of the Democratic Party to try to get that measure added into the reconciliation, because Americans don't forget, and the midterm is coming up. They will not go back out to vote. Like, a lot of people voted based off of the campaign promises that they were given. If they can't deliver on those, that's like a right check that they can't cash, and people don't forget that kind of stuff.
Those are excellent points, and the thing is, even though Bernie Sanders has years on him, I think he was elected to Congress either in the late 80s or early 1990s. I think 1990 was when he was elected to Congress. Mitch McConnell has been in there since 86. And, I do believe Bernie has strengths. And I do believe that the minimum wage needs to be increased. I think that's a non-negotiable. But in terms of, the tactics of how to gradually get there in increments, like the more moderate wing wants to do, or just, if we're like an all or nothing approach. We have the majority, let's use it. I think it's going to be an interesting dynamic to see. But I want to thank each of you for what you brought to the table tonight. Jordan Jones, Jerron Hawkins, Aaliyah Jones, and Gianna Darville, and Chris Johnson. The most fun I have on this platform is when folks disagree. I tonight was no exception. I really enjoyed tonight, and I hope that I can have you each back on in the near future if you're open, if your schedule is open. I really enjoyed tonight's discussion, and I hope that those who are viewing pay attention, refrain from going to sketchy sources of news, and really plug in to reputable sources of news. I think we talked about a little bit earlier, when we operate with different facts, that really just sets the stage for division. We can't be united with separate scripts. We can't be united with a separate set of facts. And I think being plugged in to actual, reputable sources is the responsibility of being a citizen. The defense is going to be starting their arguments tomorrow. Next week, we'll be doing another discussion about it. I hope each of you take care of yourselves, and I hope to have you back on soon. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and end this broadcast of episode 30. I can't believe it. Episode 30 of the Political Mike podcast. Thank you so